Welcome to San Antonio Injury and Employment Law Podcast.
Welcome to the San Antonio Injury and Employment Law Podcast with Trey Cammack, founder of Cammack Law PLLC. Trey is a personal injury attorney based in San Antonio who helps individuals and families navigate serious injury cases with clear, practical approach. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're walking through what actually happens after a car accident and what you need to know in those first critical hours and days. Trey, welcome.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate you having me and being such a good host.
Good stuff. Appreciate you, Trey. So before we get into the nitty gritty, can you share a little bit about your background, kind of what led you to focus on personal injury cases in San Antonio?
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm from East Texas originally. I'm born and raised in Texas. I grew up there and I finally moved to San Antonio to go to law school. But before I did, I worked in a number of industries. I spent the better part of a decade waxing floors, doing construction cleanup, worked in bookstores. I did roofing. I did door-to-door sales, kind of everything you can think of and in between. And I really enjoyed all those industries, but there's several of those industries I worked in where people would be injured and working through work. And I remember they really didn't have a choice if that employer didn't have workers' compensation or they didn't have some type of coverage. And over the years, I kind of watched as I worked through those industries, people not being able to kind of protect themselves, just kind of be in a situation where they kind of work through pain or deal with situations. I also had in 2019, I'd been working for about 6 years as a lawyer doing predominantly employment law. I'd started doing some personal injury. My mom actually had a back surgery and she had a laminectomy that through no fault of the doctors or anything, but just after the reality, it was a really, really bad procedure for her. And frankly, has caused her years and years of medical issues since. A combination of kind of watching those things in the workplace and then watching what happened to my mom made me really want to dive into helping people with injuries, particularly when it's from the fault of other people or of a company.
So Trey, speaking with that being said, after that, your background and your experience, so right after a crash happens, what does that moment usually look like for people, at the scene, especially if they've never been through any of this before?
Yeah, I think it's one thing we need to talk about is kind of how common these things are, right? So people often are in car wrecks, people are rear-ended. At the scene of the wreck, they need to, if they're able, move their vehicle first off the side of the road and get out of the flow of traffic. If there's a convenience store, go right there. Somewhere where you can take pictures of any skid marks, scene of the wreck, if you're able to move your vehicle or not. Check on the other people, of course. The first thing you need to do, make sure they're safe, make sure they're okay. Document. These days, a lot more evidence is going to be stored as vehicles get more advanced on electronic data recorders, on black boxes. It could be also on, your cell phones. If people are on their cell phone while driving, that's a problem, of course. But there's also going to be evidence from dash cams, from photographs on the scene. There's data on when you take a picture on your phone, they can show directly kind of where it was taken, what the timestamp of, whose phone originated it. And so kind of making sure that obviously you're okay, the other person's okay, that you're able to kind of get photos of the scene, and calling a police officer is very important. If you got a serious wreck, you need to get a police officer, get a report. They'll often get both sides. Depending on the level of injury or if someone's been actually killed in the wreck, they will send certain type of units to do investigations out there. But it's important to get that information and to get medical treatment that day, but at least within 72 hours. A lot of times our body kind of pumps adrenaline through us. We have certain types of reactions that are actually like a natural painkiller for our body, where we may not feel the ramifications of whiplash or from other injuries that we may have incurred during the wreck that are important to document at a later date and also get treated by a doctor so that later on, if you need treatment, the insurance companies won't try to deny that it was related to the wreck, but also just so you can get general treatment.
So once things settle down, and people leave the scene, how does that situation typically start to unfold, over those next few days?
I think there's a lot of different factors, right? I mean, a lot of people are getting in a wreck on the way home, on the way to work, or from one of those areas. So, if you lose your car, now you don't have a vehicle. Well, hopefully your insurance can help you with part of that process. But oftentimes the insurance company is going to call and want a recorded statement. Now, albeit you're supposed to comply with your own insurance, there's, as far as coverage related to that. But when someone else's insurance calls you, you have no requirement to give them a recorded statement. You can just say, hey, look, we'll follow up with a written statement to you, because there's a script that's being put together by the insurance company. So they should anticipate the other side's insurance trying to kind of contain what the insurance company calls leakage. So any insurance adjuster, I mean, that's their job. That's what they do. But the industry itself is set up in a certain way to contain the amount of money that they leak, or that leakage that's beyond what the claim could get paid out for. So they're going to have a script that's drafted for its certain words to you in a certain way that it will reflect kind of what would be in their best interest, and also in collecting the data with a lot of times. So making sure you have an understanding of what your medical treatment you need is early. You go to an ER, right? ER is going to have x-rays. X-rays don't check for things that certain types of scanning like CT scans or MRIs do, but it does check for broken bones. So they want to make sure you don't have fractures. They want to make sure you don't have broken bones. If you don't have concussion symptoms or head injury symptoms, they may not run you through the scans, and they may not do it even if you do, but those symptoms will not be caught that are related to musculoskeletal injuries outside of, let's say, a broken bone. So a disc injury, okay, you have a herniation in your disc, you have some type of tears in your shoulder, tears in your knee. Those won't show up in most of the imaging that they're going to do in an emergency care center. They're doing there for trauma containment and maybe not lifelong or long-term treatment. More than half of people that have whiplash symptoms are going to have those for at least a year long. I mean, that's not something that you would necessarily get treated at the ER. So when they give you instructions to follow up with a PCP, follow up with a pain management, follow up with some type of doctor, make that follow up. I recommend people to call an attorney as well. Lawyers that go through these processes, the lawyers themselves will have more experience in negotiating with insurance companies. They may also have a network of people where they say, it sounds like you had a head injury. Maybe you should go see a neurologist. They have an ability to kind of help push the evidence in your favor as far as gathering it before it disappears. They also have ability to, subpoena records, get records from the police department. So those are all things to anticipate. And so, making sure things can be worked out with your job. If you have to miss a couple days as far as because you're too sore to work, whether it be coordinating for treatment outside of your work hours or where you leave work a little bit early, whether it be getting a new vehicle or some of the parameters related to that. Those are all things to consider outside of the treatment themselves. I know how inconvenient it is to get medical treatment. I actually treat with one of the doctors that helps some of my patients, and you got to work around your schedule. People don't want to miss time. They got to take their kids to and from school. But if you don't treat your body, those symptoms can become chronic. And they could become chronic even if you do treatment. So it's so important that people document in the beginning, get medical treatment early, make sure that they request that the interactions with the insurance company are written, get legal counsel to help them negotiate any time that the insurance company starts coming in and sounds like it's bad faith or lowballing that they do.
So what about this though? Where do people tend to make decisions that end up hurting their case later, even if they're doing the right thing?
I think that one of the things that hurts people's cases is one, the recorded statement, right? It is also starting to talk money in a real oh, I've got an ER bill. And the insurance company say, cool, we'll pay your bill. Will you sign this document? So they're not supposed to tell you this, but the reality is that you're working with an industry where you're giving money every month for potentially 20, 30 years. And if you miss a premium, they keep your money. Sorry, we keep it. But once you start to pull the money, the insurance adjusters are incentivized to get below what's called the policy limits. So if you have a negligence policy or an insurance policy that covers your car for if you hit someone else and it's your fault or not theirs, there's a limit to your policies. Or if you have underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage for yourself, there's a policy limits. They are incentivized, albeit they sign non-disclosure agreements where they're not supposed to say this, they're incentivized to always push under that policy limit or to push under it enough times to where when they're evaluated, they're not always being looked at and saying, hey, look, when you roundtable this with your supervisor, you keep pushing policy limits. We've got to contain these amounts. Also, people need to understand that there's software systems, which we can discuss a lot more in detail, but software systems that actually the needles are moved on for somehow how these evaluations are conducted, and it takes factors and just spits out a number that sometimes the adjuster doesn't have authority to evaluate. So I think if you wait too long to communicate with a lawyer, or if you get too quick into saying, hey, look, just pay my ER bill, you can cause an insurance adjuster to anchor to that low number and evaluate your case at a lower number, but also kind of leave yourself having to pay other bills, costs, and expenses out of pocket that you wouldn't have done if you'd hired counsel and got them in early. Also, there's this 24-hour to 72-hour situation where you should be going to the doctor within that time period if you need to, right? Hopefully, you're one of the car wrecks where you don't get hurt. But a lot of times people think, I'll just wait a couple weeks, I'll wait 3 weeks, I'll wait 4 weeks, I'll get to feeling better. And they end up not doing that. I think that's very prevalent with men. A lot of times, or women that, they're working a job, helping with the kids, doing all sorts of things. There's a lot of times people just don't, and a lot of times people don't want to go to the doctor at all. But if you wait more than 72 hours, insurance companies will almost always say, look, if you were really that badly hurt, you wouldn't have gone to the doctor. And oftentimes they're going to argue that to the jury as well. So if you still have symptoms 48 hours from that wreck, 24 hours from that wreck, or you wake up the next day and you hurt, go to a doc in the box, go to a clinic, go to your PCP, go to an ER, get some treatment going and see if you can get better. Because if you wait, they will say it's because you weren't that hurt, or they will say it's because it's from something else. I've kind of started calling it the Goldilocks syndrome when I negotiate with an adjuster. And so what I mean is the porridge is either too hot, your client treated too much, went to the doctor often, or it's too cold. They have gaps in treatment from the injury, or they didn't treat enough. They never say, hey, your client treated just right. Here's the policy limits. But they will pay those policy limits if it's negotiated properly with the proper evidence documented in their file. And they're going to document their file more heavily to roundtable it the more you have someone giving them, here's a police report, here's photos of the wreck, here's the ER bills. Okay, now we're supplementing pain management. Now we're supplementing these other records. They will have to continue to evaluate what their risk and assessment is.
Medical treatment can, kind of get confusing for people pretty quickly. How are injuries usually documented, in those early stages? Why does, you talked about the timing, but why does it matter so much? Because, some things can kind of come up a little bit later, but, why does that timing matter?
The timing is important because you could have a litany of injuries, right? The mechanisms of how a car hits you. Let's say you're rear-ended. So there's certain types of delta V forces that can be pushed into your body that can cause certain types of effects of physics into your spine, into other parts of your bodies. There's ways an airbag, although it protects you, could hit your face a certain way. You could get caught on your seatbelt. Again, you should be wearing a seatbelt, by the way, but I'm not advocating otherwise. But there's just different ways you can have tears or injuries in your bodies that aren't readily apparent for original treatment. ER centers are set up not for long-term concierge type of things. They're set up for how do we make sure this person is stabilized among all the other people that have severe emergent situations coming into this ER, so they can go home, so they can leave here. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be able to check for all the other factors. So oftentimes people will have what will be called a disc herniation, disc bulge, certain types of things through life itself, but also through trauma. And sometimes you have already development in your spine, certain types of disc bulges or herniations that are exacerbated by the actual wreck itself. Or you could have, let's say, a weakness in your wrist, you're holding the steering wheel, and now you have a tendon tear of the cartilage. And so those are type of factors people really need to fix and figure out soon, because if you have certain types of tears, if they keep re-tearing, they can create certain types of fatty tissue development, or that fatty tissue development is a lot harder surgically to repair. And if you have a head injury, some type of concussive injury, if it turns into what would be a traumatic brain injury or some type of symptoms like that, that can cause all sorts of memory loss, behavioral changes, cognitive issues, risks to that person that they need to get evaluated and treated. And that treatment can be a lot more intensive. So not figuring out sooner than later how to take care of that is going to be problematic for you, sometimes making you have to do more treatment or even a longer term treatment. But in other ways, it's a problem. It's just the fact that you're going to have treatment that if you get it early on, in theory, you will get relief from it sooner, or hopefully you won't need a surgical intervention. Hopefully you won't start having to do invasive procedures, but waiting longer will not make a chronic condition go away.
But you got to talk about the insurance company. They kind of reach out pretty fast. Typically, how should someone think about those early conversations before they really even understand their situation or, the severity of it?
I think it's like anything, right? It's a business. Unfortunately, it's a business that, because it's numbers based, as most businesses are, it's a very calculated process. Again, your insurance adjuster is not your enemy. If anything, hopefully the lawyers have built relationships with some of these insurance companies over the years, but the client themselves, the person in the car wreck, what they should be considering is being polite, professional, asking what they need, and keeping as many communications in writing as possible. Okay. Just because I had a phone call with an adjuster and they told me, hey, I'm going to pay this number, does not mean it's always in the file. I've had numerous adjusters where they say, well, I'm sorry, I've taken over the file. That verbal communication, which they said they would follow up with an email or a fax, is not documented in the file. All I have is the actual emails, faxes, things of that nature. So when you're looking through the file itself, as an insurance company, you're going to look, what are the written communications? What are the photos they've given us? What medical, what police report, what evidence? That's what they're evaluating from. So, keep it polite. You can very much say, hey, please forward all communications to my counsel. Please forward me what, information on the insurance policy. They'll rarely do that. But if they have a copy early on of evidence, the sooner they have evidence, the sooner they have to give reports on their particular cases they're working. And if they want to pay out beyond what it's evaluated, they have to roundtable it usually. So I'd say keep it polite, keep it professional. Have communications go through counsel, and then follow up with your lawyer. Make sure your lawyer is actually responding to the insurance company in a way that makes sense. If you need copies for stuff from your file, you're entitled to it. It's your file. It's your case.
To kind of put a bow on everything there, Trey, how does someone know if it's time to bring in an attorney and and what changes, once they do?
Sometimes people have a really good experience with specific insurance companies. Sometimes if you're hearing a conversation where they're saying, we're evaluating this, we are going to tender our limits, we're going to pay the policy limits, there's no point to bring a lawyer in who's going to take a percentage in at that point if they're going to go ahead and do that, because now you're splitting it with the lawyer. But as soon as you're hearing, hey, we will not do anything without a recorded statement, we can't evaluate your claim without a recorded statement, that's a red flag. They don't need that. You're not under law required to give someone else's insurance a recorded statement on what happened. And if they're gathering evidence, but they're doing just lowball offers, trying to resolve right away, putting numbers into a settlement release and sending it to you before negotiating it, those are red flags. Anytime that they immediately are denying liability, let's say you're at a swearing match at the stop sign, but two cars are hit by their car. Well, what's the likelihood that these two cars both ran the red light as opposed to that one? And they start saying, well, no, swearing match, red light, we can't help you. If you start hearing language where it's, you were there, liability is clear, you've sent them a dash cam that shows that they rear-ended you, not that you slammed your brakes, and they're just having a nonsensical conversation where they're just denying liability, or they're saying, hey, our insured said this, despite what the evidence says, you've got to start getting a lawyer involved. That's the time to do it.
Good stuff. Trey, thank you for your time, brother.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. That's it for today's episode of the San Antonio Injury and Employment Law Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Trey Cammack and his work at Cammack Law PLLC, you can visit CammackLawPLLC.com or reach out to the firm directly. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review so more people in San Antonio can get the information they need after an accident. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.